She did not cry. That was the thing no one expected. Elizabeth Carter stood in the doorway of the grandest bedroom she had ever seen. Silk curtains carved wood, a fire burning low, and she did not shed a single tear. Because William Harrington, the most powerful man in 3 counties, had just looked at his new bride on their wedding night and said without flinching, "You will sleep alone." And she had simply nodded. If this story moves you, subscribe and leave your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1817 came to Virginia like a warning. Hot, still, heavy with the kind of silence that settles over a place just before something changes forever. The church at the edge of Harrington land was small white clapboard walls, a single bell that had not rung for a wedding in 11 years. The pews were full, but not with joy. The townspeople of Verhome had come to watch. That was all. They pressed their good coats against the wooden seats and whispered behind gloved hands and watched Elizabeth Carter walk down the aisle like she was the answer to a question no one had wanted to ask out loud. She wore ivory, not white. Ivory practical second-hand, altered 3 times to fit a figure that had spent 7 years working in other people's houses. Her gloves were borrowed. Her veil was her mother's. The small spray of honeysuckle she carried was the only living thing in the whole building that seemed genuinely happy to be there. She walked alone. Her father had died 2 winters past. Her mother was too ill to travel. And so Elizabeth Carter walked down the aisle of the Verhome church with no one beside her, her chin level, her eyes forward, her face composed into an expression that the women in the pews later described as dignified, though most of them meant strange. Strange because she did not smile. Strange because she did not look at the man waiting for her at the altar like he was a prize. Strange because she looked at William Harrington, the way you look at a thunderstorm rolling in from the mountains with respect and wariness and the quiet knowledge that you cannot stop what is coming. William Harrington did not smile either. He stood at the front of the church in a coat so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it, his hands clasped behind his back. His face, the same face that had won 3 military campaigns and broken 4 contract negotiations and made grown men lower their eyes and step aside on the street. He was 36 years old and looked every year of it not old but weathered. Like a fence post that had survived every season and intended to survive more. He watched her come toward him. He did not move. He did not soften. The Reverend performed the ceremony with the careful speed of a man who understood he was being paid to finish quickly. The vows were spoken. The ring was placed plain gold, no engraving. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride," William Harrington did something that made every woman in the church press her lips together. He took Elizabeth's hand, lifted it, pressed his mouth to her knuckles, brief correct the kiss of a man completing a transaction. And that was that. The carriage ride to Harrington Estate took 40 minutes. They rode in silence for the first 30. Elizabeth sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the Virginia countryside move past the window. Green hills rolling away into afternoon heat. Farmhouses set back from dirt roads. The occasional distant figure of a man working a field who paused and straightened to watch the Harrington carriage pass. She had heard about Harrington Estate for years. Everyone in 3 counties had. The house that sat on 300 acres of prime Virginia land, the Harrington fortune built on timber and trade, and a grandfather who had known George Washington personally. The house where William Harrington had lived alone for 11 years after his first wife died, where no woman had been welcome since, where the staff spoke in low voices and the shutters on the east wing were rumored to never open. She had heard all of it. She had come anyway. Because when a woman of 27 with no money, no prospects, and a mother to support receives an offer of marriage from the wealthiest man in the county, she does not have the luxury of asking whether the arrangement will be warm. She asks only whether it will be honest. And William Harrington, to his credit, had been honest from the very first meeting. She had been working as a companion to old Mrs. Aldridge when he came to call, not on her, but on Mrs. Aldridge's son on business. Elizabeth had served the tea. She had not tried to speak. She had not tried to be noticed. She had simply poured the tea and set the cups correctly and stood to one side in the way she had learned to stand in other people's houses, present, but quiet, useful, but invisible. Afterward, William Harrington had stopped in the hallway. He had looked at her. Really looked in a way that men of his position rarely did with women who poured tea, and said, "You are Elizabeth Carter, Robert Carter's daughter." "Yes, sir," she had said. "Your father died owing debts. Your mother is ill. You have been living in service for 6 years." It was not a question. It was a recitation of facts. She had met his eyes and said, "7 years, sir." And he had almost looked startled. "I require a mistress for my estate," he had said. "Someone capable, discreet, someone who understands how to manage a household and has no illusions about what marriage to a man like me would mean." She had waited. "I am offering you my name, financial security for your mother, and a position of respect in this community," he continued. "In exchange, I ask that you run my household, attend the social obligations my position requires, and make no demands upon my personal life." "And if I have questions?" she had asked. He had looked at her again, that same measuring look. "You may ask one," he said. She had taken a breath. "Are you a cruel man, Mr. Harrington?" Something had moved across his face, not quite surprise, not quite offense. "No," he had said after a moment. "I am a closed one." She had thought about it for 3 days. Then she had sent her acceptance. It was in the 10th minute of the carriage ride that William Harrington finally spoke. He was looking out his window, not at her. "I want to clarify something before we arrive," he said. His voice was what she had come to think of as his public voice, measured, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned to speak in boardrooms and courthouses and had never fully unlearned it. "Of course," Elizabeth said. "You will have everything appropriate to your station," he said. "The east bedroom has been prepared for you. It is the largest in the house apart from my own. You will have 2 personal maids, full access to the household accounts, and authority over all domestic matters." "That is generous," she said. "It is correct," he said. "You are the mistress of Harrington Estate. You will be treated as such." A pause. Elizabeth waited. She had learned in 7 years of working in other people's houses that the most important things were always what came after the pause. "However," William said. "There it was. Our marriage is an arrangement," he said. "I want you to understand that clearly, not as an insult, as a fact. I am not in a position to offer you more than what I have described. Companionship, respect, security. I will be a fair man and a consistent one, but I will not be a husband in the fuller sense of that word." Elizabeth looked at her hands. "You will spend our wedding night alone," he said. The words landed in the carriage like a stone dropped into still water. She let them settle. Then she said very quietly, "I appreciate you telling me." He finally turned to look at her. She thought she saw something flicker in his expression, some small expectation that she would cry or protest or demand something different. She had the impression that he had prepared himself for that conversation, steeled himself for it, the way a man steels himself before delivering news he knows will wound. She did not give him that conversation. "7 years ago," she said, "I watched a man tell a woman he was fond of her on the morning they became engaged, and by winter she had discovered he only wanted her family's land. She cried every day of her marriage for 11 years until he died." William watched her. "At least," Elizabeth said, "you told me the truth before we arrived." A silence. Then carefully, "Yes," he said. "I did." She turned back to her window. The carriage moved on through the summer heat, and William Harrington, for the first time in longer than he could precisely remember, did not know what to say next. Harrington Estate rose out of the Virginia landscape, like something that had always been there and always intended to remain. 3 stories of red brick and white trim, 6 columns across the front windows that caught the late afternoon light and threw it back in gold. 12 chimneys. A front drive lined with old oaks that made a tunnel of shade the carriage moved through like passing into another world. It was extraordinary. And it was entirely, completely cold. Elizabeth felt it before she understood it. Some quality in the air, in the stillness, in the way the house sat against the summer sky, without a single sound rising from it. No voices. No laughter. No dogs barking. Just the creak of carriage wheels and the shift of horses. And then as the carriage stopped, the soft sound of the front door opening and a row of staff appearing on the steps, in order of rank faces, arranged into the careful neutral expressions of people who had learned not to show too much. She counted 14. 14 people who lived and worked in this place and made no sound at all. William stepped out first. He turned and offered her his hand, not warm, but correct. She took it, descended, stood beside him on the drive, and looked up at the house. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is functional," he said. "Yes." She paused. "But it feels like nobody lives here." She had not planned to say it. It simply came out quietly, without accusation, the way you state an observable fact. William went very still beside her. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the house. "The staff have assembled to meet you," he said after a moment. His voice had changed something in it that she couldn't quite name. Not anger. Something more like a man who has been unexpectedly touched in a place he forgot was tender. "Of course," she said, and walked forward. "So." The housekeeper's name was Mrs. Pratt. A stout, careful woman of 50, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of life to be neither warm nor cold, but simply watchful. She had been at Harrington Estate for 23 years. She had outlasted the previous Mrs. Harrington, the years of William's absence during the war, the long silence that had settled over the house afterward, and the succession of social secretaries and estate managers who had attempted to fill the gap left by a mistress and failed. She led Elizabeth through the house. Elizabeth asked questions. Not the questions Mrs. Pratt expected, not about the silverware, or the linen inventory, or the proper management of the quarterly accounts. Those would come. But first Elizabeth asked, "What is Mr. Harrington's usual hour for breakfast?" "7:30, ma'am." "Does he take it in the dining room?" "In his study, ma'am. He prefers to work while he eats." "And the household staff, do they eat well?" A pause. Barely perceptible, but there. "Well enough, ma'am." "What does well enough mean in this house?" Mrs. Pratt looked at her, then really looked the way the housekeeper of a large estate looks at a new mistress to determine what kind of trouble or help she is going to be. The previous Mrs. Harrington believed the staff should be grateful for whatever they received, Mrs. Pratt said carefully. "I see," said Elizabeth. "And what did the staff believe?" A very small pause. "They believed they worked hard, ma'am." "Yes," said Elizabeth. "I expect they did." They moved on through the house. William Harrington did not come to dinner. Mrs. Pratt informed Elizabeth without quite meeting her eyes that the master often dined in his study and that she had been instructed to, here she paused, chose her word, accommodate his habits. "Of course," Elizabeth said. She ate alone in the dining room. The table seated 24. She sat at one end of it and was served a perfectly prepared meal by two footmen who moved with the silent efficiency of people who had learned not to exist too loudly in this house, and she ate it steadily and without self-pity. And when she was done, she thanked them by name. She had memorized 4 names already and intended to learn the rest by morning, and went upstairs to the east bedroom. The east bedroom was, as William had said, the largest in the house apart from his own. 4 windows. A fireplace. A dressing table of polished mahogany. A bed large enough to sleep a family of 4, made up with white linen, so crisp it seemed almost military in its precision. On the dressing table, someone had placed a small vase of wildflowers. Elizabeth stood looking at them for a moment. She did not know who had put them there. Not William, she was almost certain of that. Possibly one of the young maids, some small private act of welcome that the house had not officially authorized. She picked up the vase, held it, put it back. Then she sat on the edge of the great bed in the great room in the great house that felt like nobody lived there, and she did not cry. She thought about what she had. A name. Security. 14 staff to manage and a household to run. Her mother would receive $40 a month. The debts were cleared. She had a place to be of use. It was more than many women had. It was enough. She told herself that very clearly in the quiet of the east bedroom, while the summer night pressed warm against the windows. It was enough. She almost believed it. 3 days passed. Elizabeth learned the house the way she had learned every house she'd worked in, systematically, without drama, starting in the places no one expected her to go. She went to the kitchen first at 6 in the morning before the household had fully woken. She found Cook, a wide-shouldered woman named Bess, who had come with the estate and had opinions about everything in the middle of planning a week's worth of meals, using a list that had clearly not been updated in some years. "This says 12 pounds of beef a week," Elizabeth said, looking at the ledger. "Yes, ma'am," said Bess. "For 14 staff, Mr. Harrington and myself." "Yes, ma'am. That is less than £1 per person." Bess said nothing, but her jaw set in a way that told Elizabeth everything. "Starting next week," Elizabeth said, "I want 18 pounds, and I want something hot for the staff at midday, not bread, something proper. Can you manage that?" Bess looked at her with an expression that was guarded, and underneath the guard, something that might eventually become grateful. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I can manage that." The second morning, Elizabeth walked the grounds. She walked all of them: the formal gardens, the kitchen garden, the orchard, the fields beyond the fence line where the tenant farmers worked the land. She introduced herself to 4 tenant families. She learned the names of 11 children. She accepted a cup of water from a woman named Hannah, whose husband worked the far fields, and who looked at Elizabeth with the careful eyes of someone who has learned that mistresses of the big house come and go. "How long have you been here?" Elizabeth asked. 14 years, ma'am," Hannah said. "Do you like it?" Hannah considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "It is steady," she said. "Mr. Harrington is fair with the rents. Doesn't come looking for more than what's agreed." "But," Elizabeth said. Hannah looked at her hands. "The house was warmer once," she said. "Before his wife died," Elizabeth said quietly. Hannah nodded. "She used to walk out here, bring the children sweets at Christmas time. Used to laugh, you could hear her from the road sometimes." A pause. "The master doesn't laugh," Hannah said. "Not anymore." On the 4th morning, William came to breakfast in the dining room. Elizabeth was already there when he arrived. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her just briefly, and she had the impression he had not fully planned for this, had perhaps assumed she would take her meals at different hours to avoid the awkwardness of sharing a table. She set down her cup. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said. He came to the table, sat across from her, said nothing while the footman served his coffee. When the footman withdrew, he said, "You went to the tenant fields." It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "I wanted to know the full extent of the estate. It is not usual for the mistress of the house to—" "I know," she said. "I have spent 7 years learning what is usual. I find that usual and useful are not always the same thing." A pause. He looked at her over his coffee cup. "Mrs. Pratt tells me you changed the staff meal arrangements," he said. "I did. Without consulting me. You gave me authority over domestic matters," she said. "Feeding the people who work in your house falls within domestic matters, I believe." His expression was unreadable. "It will cost more," he said. $12 more per month," she said. "Against the cost of replacing trained staff who leave because they are underfed and undervalued, it is economical." He set down his cup. "You have been here 4 days," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you have already decided what this house requires." She met his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "I have decided what the people in this house require. The house itself requires rather less, I think." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his cup again. "You will find," he said carefully, "that I am not accustomed to being contradicted." "I expect not," she said. "But I am not contradicting you, Mr. Harrington. I am doing the work you hired me to do." Another pause. Then, with something that might, in a different man's face, have been the beginning of a reluctant acknowledgement. "See that the expenditure is recorded properly," he said. "Yes, sir," she said, and returned to her breakfast. It was on the 6th day that she found the door. She had been moving through the Upper East Wing, taking stock of rooms that were being underused, when she found the hallway that ended in a door she had not seen before, plain without ornament, latched but not locked. She opened it. The room behind it was not large. It had been a child's room once. She could see it in the proportions in the low windows, ill in the faded pattern on the walls that resolved when she looked closely into a painted frieze of horses and trees. The room had been emptied. Not neglected, emptied. Deliberately. The kind of emptying that is the opposite of forgetting. There was nothing in it except dust and light, and the faint trapped smell of summer heat, and old wood, and something else. Something she could not name, that sat in the air like grief that had been locked in so long it had forgotten how to move. She stood in the doorway. She did not go in. She pulled the door closed. And as she turned back to the hallway, she found William Harrington standing at the far end of it watching her. She did not know how long he had been there. He said nothing. She said, "I'm sorry. I was taking inventory. I didn't know it was a room I should not open." "You should not," he said. His voice was not angry. It was careful the way you speak when you are moving a wound carefully so as not to open it further. "I won't go in," she said. "No," he said. "You will not." She waited. He came forward. A few steps stopped, looked at the closed door with an expression she recognized, not because she had seen it on him before, but because she had seen it in mirrors in her worst years, in the face of a woman who has lost something she did not know how to name and does not know how to grieve. "I am sorry," she said again, quieter, "for whatever you lost." He turned to look at her. "You don't know what I lost," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I know what loss looks like in a house." Something moved across his face. He said nothing. He turned and walked back down the hallway. Elizabeth stood alone in the East Wing corridor, and for the first time since she had arrived at Harrington Estate, she felt the full weight of what she had come into. Not the size of it, not the wealth of it, but the grief of it. The way it had soaked into the walls and the floorboards and the locked rooms, the way it sat over this house like weather. She thought, "I cannot fix this." She thought, "I was not brought here to fix this." She thought, "But Lord, it is a heavy thing to live in." And then she straightened her back and smoothed her skirt and went back to work. 2 weeks in, she found the boy. She had gone to the village to speak with the schoolmaster about the state of the school, which was, she had discovered, in a state of comprehensive disrepair. Half the children not attending, because the building leaked and the parents saw little point. She was standing outside it, making notes in the small book she carried everywhere when she heard the shouting. In the space behind the blacksmiths, 2 men had a boy by the collar. How was perhaps 9. Small, thin, in the way of children who do not eat enough, dark hair, eyes too large, in a face that had gone very still with fear. "Caught him," the blacksmith said to no one in particular. "Took a loaf from Henderson's cart." A small crowd had gathered. "Boy needs to be taken to the constable," someone said. Elizabeth walked across the yard. "Let him go," she said. The men looked at her. "Mrs. Harrington," the blacksmith said, with the careful respect of a man who is surprised but not pleased. "This ain't your business, ma'am." "Everything in this village is my business," she said. "I am the mistress of Harrington Estate, and this village sits on Harrington land. Let the boy go." A pause. The blacksmith looked at his companion. The boy was trembling. Slowly, reluctantly, the blacksmith released the boy's collar. The boy stood, not running, looking at Elizabeth with an expression she recognized, the careful, calculating look of a child who has learned not to trust kindness, because kindness is often a trick. She crouched down, which put her at eye level with him. "What's your name?" she asked. A long pause. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas, are you hungry?" He said nothing, which was answer enough. She stood, turned to Henderson, who was watching from behind his cart. "What did the loaf cost?" she asked. 4 cents, ma'am." She opened her purse, counted out a dime. "This covers it, and the next 2, she said. "If Thomas comes to your cart hungry, you feed him and bring the bill to the estate." Henderson blinked. "And if Mr. Harrington don't want to pay," someone muttered from the back of the crowd. "Then I will pay," she said. "From my own purse. Is that clear?" A silence. She looked at Thomas. "Come," she said. "I'm going to find you something to eat." The boy looked at her for one more long moment. Then slowly, he fell into step beside her. She told William about it that evening. He came to the dining room again. She had not been certain he would. He had been avoiding it, she thought, since the morning of their argument. But she had asked Mrs. Pratt to set a second place, and at 7 o'clock he appeared in the doorway and looked at the table and then at her. "Mrs. Pratt said you wanted to speak with me," he said. "I wanted to tell you what happened in the village today," she said. "It involves estate funds, so it is properly your business." He sat. She told him about Thomas, about the bread, about Henderson's cart. She told it plainly, without drama, the way she told most things. When she finished, there was a silence. "You paid from the estate account," he said. "A dime," she said. "That is not the point." "I know," she said. "The point is that a boy was hungry. The point is that taking him to the constable would have solved nothing, and confirmed to him that this world has no use for people like him. And then in 10 years, when he is old enough to be genuinely dangerous instead of merely desperate, we will all act surprised." William looked at her. "He stole," William said. "That cannot simply be—" "He was hungry," she said. "Those are not the same thing, Mr. Harrington. You cannot. A hungry child is not proof of a bad heart," she said, and her voice was quiet, but absolutely steady. "Sometimes it is proof that someone failed to care." A silence. William looked down at his plate. When he looked up, something in his expression had shifted so slightly she might have imagined it. Some small rearrangement, like a door that has been pushed just barely off its latch. "The boy," he said carefully. "Where is he now?" "With Bess in the kitchen," she said. "She is feeding him. I expect she'll find him a place to sleep tonight, and we'll work out the rest tomorrow." "Work out the rest," he repeated. "He has no family that he will speak of," she said. "And he is 9 years old. We'll work out the rest." William said nothing for a long time. Then, "Mrs. Pratt will need to approve any permanent—" "Yes," Elizabeth said. "Of course." Another silence. "The school," he said suddenly. "You were at the school. The roof is in need of repair. Several families have stopped sending their children because of it." "I know the roof needs repair," he said. "Then why—" She stopped. "I'm sorry. That is not—" "Why hasn't it been done?" he said, finishing her sentence. "Because there has been no one to care that it hasn't been done. The estate manager sees to the fields and the fences and the tenant houses. The school fell through the space between what is my business and what is the village's business. Then perhaps," she said, "we should close that space." He looked at her. "You have been here 2 weeks," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you intend to repair the school, feed every hungry child in the village, and rearrange the staff meals." "I intend," she said carefully, "to do the work I was brought here to do, which is to manage this household and represent this estate in the community. That is what you asked for, Mr. Harrington. That is what I am trying to give you." A very long pause. "The school roof," he said. "I will send men in the morning." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. And for the first time since she had arrived at Harrington Estate, William Harrington sat at the table for the full length of dinner. He did not say much, but he stayed. Later, much later, when the house was quiet and the summer dark had settled fully around Harrington Estate, Elizabeth sat at the window of the east bedroom and listened to the crickets and the distant sound of an owl in the oaks, and thought about what she had said to Hannah on the 3rd day. The house was warmer once. She thought about the empty room in the east wing, the horses and trees painted on the wall, the particular quality of the silence behind that door. She thought about William Harrington standing at the end of the hallway, watching her, his face holding something that had no name but that she recognized anyway. She was not here to save him. She understood that very clearly. She was not naive enough, or young enough, or romantic enough to believe that love was a thing that arrived because you were good enough, or patient enough, or useful enough. She had watched too many women wait for that. She had watched them become the shapes of their waiting. She was not here to save him. But she thought, I am here. And I am going to be fully here and do this work as well as I know how, and whatever else happens or does not happen. At least this house will be better for my having been in it. She thought that was a thing worth doing. She thought she could build a life on that. She went to bed. Outside, the Virginia summer pressed warm and heavy against the windows of Harrington Estate, and somewhere in the dark of the house in the study on the ground floor, a light burned until well past midnight, which was, as Mrs. Pratt could have told anyone who asked, unusual. William Harrington did not typically sit with a lamp burning past 10 o'clock. He had not in 11 years found reason to stay awake thinking. Tonight, he did. The morning after William stayed late in his study, he was already gone by the time Elizabeth came down. Mrs. Pratt told her without being asked, the way housekeepers tell a new mistress things they think she ought to know, without making it seem like they are taking sides, that Mr. Harrington had ridden out at first light to inspect the tenant fields on the north boundary. He did this sometimes, Mrs. Pratt said. When something was on his mind, he rode. Elizabeth filed that away. She had her own morning to manage. Thomas was still in the kitchen. She had half expected him to be gone, had half expected to come downstairs and find Bess shaking her head and reporting that the boy had slipped out before dawn, the way stray things often do when they are not yet sure they are safe. But Thomas was sitting on the wooden stool near the hearth, watching Bess, with the focused, assessing attention of a child who is trying to determine whether this is real or a trick, and eating a piece of bread with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned not to eat too fast, because fast eating draws attention. Elizabeth sat across from him. He looked up at her. She said, "Good morning, Thomas." He said nothing, but he did not look away, which she counted as progress. "Do you have anyone?" she asked. "Family. Anyone who will be looking for you?" A long pause. "No, ma'am," he said. "How long have you been on your own?" He considered the question with the seriousness of someone doing arithmetic. "Since February," he said. February was 5 months ago. 5 months, 9 years old. Virginia summer, stealing bread from carts. She kept her face very still, because she had learned that pity, when it shows on your face too quickly, makes children like Thomas close up like a fist. "Can you work?" she asked instead. He blinked. This was apparently not the question he expected. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and something shifted in his posture, a straightening, a wary dignity. "Good," she said. "Then we will find you something useful to do." She looked at Bess over the boy's. Bess gave a small nod. The kind of nod that means, "I already decided this, but I am glad you decided it too." That was how Thomas came to live at Harrington Estate. William did not say anything about it when he returned from his ride and found the boy stacking wood in the yard under the supervision of the youngest footman, James, who was 17 and had the loose, easy manner of a young man who finds most things interesting. William stopped. He looked at Thomas for a long moment. Thomas looked back at him with the unwavering, slightly defiant gaze of a child who has faced down worse. Then William walked inside. That evening, Elizabeth was reviewing the household accounts in the parlor when she heard William's voice in the hallway, not raised, but carrying, saying to Mrs. Pratt, "The boy is to have proper meals and proper clothes. See to it." And Mrs. Pratt's voice, very carefully neutral, "Yes, sir, as Mrs. Harrington has already arranged." A pause. "Good," William said. Elizabeth kept her eyes on the account ledger and did not smile. But it was a near thing. The days moved into a rhythm after that. Not a warm rhythm, not yet. But a rhythm which was something. William appeared at breakfast most mornings. He spoke to her about estate matters, about the repairs to the school roof, which his men had begun that week, about a dispute between two of the tenant farmers that needed mediating. She spoke to him about the household, about the village, about the things she was learning. They spoke, in other words, like two people managing a shared enterprise, which was what they were. But there were moments, small ones, the kind that are easy to overlook. The morning she arrived at breakfast to find that someone had moved the vase of wildflowers from her bedroom to the dining table. She looked at it. She looked at William. He was reading his paper. He did not acknowledge the flowers. She sat down. "The flowers are nice," she said. "Bess put them there," he said without looking up. "Of course," she said. She was almost entirely sure Bess had done no such thing. The afternoon. She was coming back from the village, and her horse shied at something in the road. She kept her seat, barely pulling the mare back with both hands, and when she finally had the animal steady, She looked up and found William on the road ahead of her, having apparently come from the opposite direction, watching her with an expression that she could only describe as involuntary. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, catching her breath. "Yes, I'm fine. She's nervous about the heat." He rode closer, looked at her quickly, thoroughly, the way a military man assesses damage. "Your hands," he said. She looked down. The reins had pulled across her palms when the mare shied. Not badly, but enough to leave red marks. "It's nothing," she said. He reached into his coat and produced a clean handkerchief, held it out. She looked at it, took it, wrapped it around her right hand without drama. "Thank you," she said. He turned his horse back toward the estate. "Come," he said. "The road is worse ahead. I will ride back with you." He said it like an instruction, like the most natural thing in the world, like a man who has decided to do a thing and sees no reason to make it complicated. She fell in beside him. They rode back to Harrington Estate, side by side, through the summer afternoon, and they did not speak, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced since she arrived. That was the third week. The fourth week was when the trouble came from outside. Her name was Mrs. Cecilia Worthington, and she arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a carriage that cost more than most families earned in a year, with 2 daughters in tow, and an expression that announced very clearly that she had come to take the measure of William Harrington's new wife. Elizabeth received her in the front parlor. She had been warned. Mrs. Pratt, with the careful loyalty of a woman who has transferred her allegiance and intends to protect it, had told her that morning. "Mrs. Worthington will call today, ma'am. She was there with some expectation some years ago that her eldest daughter and Mr. Harrington might, that is to say—" "I understand," Elizabeth had said. "She is not always kind, ma'am," Mrs. Pratt said. "I have met unkind women before," Elizabeth said. "Show her in when she arrives." Mrs. Worthington sat across from Elizabeth in the best chair and accepted tea and looked at Elizabeth the way a woman looks at something she has decided to dismiss but wants to confirm deserves dismissal first. "You are younger than I expected," she said, "though not young." "I am 27, Elizabeth said pleasantly. "Yes, and of course William's first wife was—" Mrs. Worthington paused with the precision of a woman who knows exactly how to use a pause. "She was exceptional. I don't suppose anyone expected him to find someone comparable." The 2 daughters, to their credit, looked faintly embarrassed. Elizabeth set her teacup down. "Mrs. Worthington," she said, "I have no intention of being compared to William's first wife. She was his wife, and I honor that. I am his wife now, and I intend to do this position justice. I hope we can be good neighbors." "Of course," Mrs. Worthington said, smiling in the way that means the opposite. "We all hope that." "Good," said Elizabeth. A silence. Then Mrs. Worthington said, "I do wonder, though William was always so particular. One wonders what it was about you specifically that persuaded him. Given that you were a—" She paused again with great delicacy. "A companion, was it, working in service?" "Yes," Elizabeth said. "I was." "How unusual." "Perhaps," Elizabeth said. "Or perhaps he valued competence over convention. Men of genuine substance sometimes do." It landed. She watched it land. Mrs. Worthington's smile tightened by precisely 1 degree. "How very modern," Mrs. Worthington said. "Isn't it?" said Elizabeth, and offered more tea. After they left the daughters trailing their mother back to the carriage with the relieved urgency of people escaping a situation they did not enjoy. Elizabeth sat for a moment in the parlor and let herself feel the tiredness of it. Not defeat, just tiredness. The kind that comes from performing composure for an audience that wanted you to flinch. She had not flinched, but she was tired. She was still sitting there, hands quiet in her lap, when William appeared in the doorway. She looked up. "Mrs. Pratt told me the Worthingtons called," he said. "Yes," she said. "We had tea." He looked at her. "How was it?" "Instructive," she said. He came into the room, sat in the chair across from her, the same chair Mrs. Worthington had occupied, and looked at her with an expression she was beginning to learn. It was the expression he wore when he was asking a question he was not sure he was entitled to ask. "She said something," he said. Several things, Elizabeth said. She is a woman who believes that words are very effective weapons. She is not wrong. What did she say? Elizabeth considered. She compared me to your first wife, she said. Unfavorably, but carefully. The way you say something, so that there is nothing specific to object to. William's jaw tightened. I see, he said. It's all right, Elizabeth said. It is not. William. She said his name, not Mr. Harrington, not Sir, and she felt the weight of it in the room, the small surprise of it. I have spent 7 years in other people's houses. I have been compared, assessed, found wanting, and found acceptable by people who had far more cause to judge me than Mrs. Worthington. I am still here. He was looking at her very intently now. She had no right, he said. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. No, Elizabeth said. But she did it anyway. Most things that aren't right still happen. A silence. Then, I will speak to her, William said. You will not, Elizabeth said firmly. If you defend me to Mrs. Worthington, it will confirm everything she suspects, that I am not capable of holding my own position and that you are managing me. I am not managed, Mr. Harrington. I handled it. He stared at her. You handled it, he said slowly. Yes. How? She told him. Exactly what she had said. When she finished, there was another silence. And then William Harrington did something she had not yet seen him do. He laughed. Not a big laugh, barely a laugh at all. More an involuntary exhale, a single breath that broke through whatever kept his expression closed. But it was real. She heard it. And he heard himself hear it, and something shifted in his face. Something startled, and then quickly, carefully composed again. But she had seen it. Men of genuine substance, he repeated. It was the most insulting thing I could say without saying anything. She could actually take offense at, Elizabeth said. It was well done, he said. And then more quietly, she had no right to speak to you that way. No, Elizabeth agreed. Margaret, my first wife, she would have. He stopped. Elizabeth waited. She would have found it funny, he said finally. She had that she could find the absurdity in things, in people who took themselves too seriously. A pause. She sounds wonderful, Elizabeth said, and meant it. He looked at her, clearly expecting something other than what she had said. Expecting perhaps the careful discomfort that women show when their husbands mention the dead wife. The stiffening, the withdrawal. Instead, Elizabeth said, Tell me about her. How was quiet for so long, she thought he wasn't going to. Then, she laughed at me on the day we met. I said something I don't even remember what, some pompous thing. And she just laughed. Nobody laughed at me. Not like that. Not like it was genuinely funny. It sounds like she saw you clearly, Elizabeth said. Yes, he said. She did. That is a rare thing, Elizabeth said. To be seen. He looked at his hands. I had 8 years with her, he said. 8 years and a son, and then... He stopped. The fever, it was fast, both of them. Thomas, our son. His name was Thomas. He was 3. The boy in the kitchen, Elizabeth thought. His name is Thomas. She wondered if William had noticed. Decided from his expression that he had. I'm sorry, she said, simply, without embellishment, because there was nothing else to say. I decided, William said, and his voice had gone very careful, the way a man's voice goes when he is carrying something heavy, that if I did not, that there was no point. He stopped again, started over. I decided that caring about things led to losing them, and that losing things was unbearable, Elizabeth said. Yes. So you stopped, she said. Yes. And then you woke up 10 years later, she said very quietly, and the house was cold and empty, and you realized that not caring is also a kind of losing. It just happens slower. He looked at her. She held his gaze. I did not come here to push into things that are not my business, she said. I will not. But I am aware, William, that this house has been carrying something for a long time, and I think you have been carrying it alone. I chose to carry it alone, he said. Yes, she said. People often choose the heaviest way to carry things. It doesn't mean the load isn't breaking them. A silence that lasted long enough to become something. Then William stood abruptly, the way a man stands when he has let himself get too close to something and needs to re-establish distance. I have work, he said. Of course, she said. He moved toward the door, stopped. Without turning, he said, You did not flinch today. With the Worthington woman. No, she said. Most people do, he said, flinch, when she comes at them. I am not most people, Elizabeth said. He stood still for one more moment. Then he walked out. She sat in the parlor for a little while longer, listening to his footsteps cross the entrance hall and disappear in the direction of his study. Then she smoothed her dress and went to find Thomas in the yard, because she had promised to show him how to properly address a letter, and she kept her promises. The school roof was finished by the end of the 4th week. Elizabeth attended the reopening. It was not properly speaking a formal event, but word had spread through the village, and a number of families had gathered outside the building with the collective air of people who are pleased, but are not quite sure what to do about being pleased. The schoolmaster, a thin young man named Mr. Greaves, who had taken the position with high ideals and nearly resigned twice in the 2 years since, due to the state of the physical building, shook Elizabeth's hand with a grip that communicated considerably more than his careful words. Mrs. Harrington, he said, this means a great deal. It is only a roof, she said. It is more than a roof, he said, and looked at the families gathered, the children already pressing toward the door. It is the difference between children who believe someone cares what happens to them and children who don't. That difference matters more than any roof. She thought about that for a long time afterward. She told William about it that evening. He listened. He was quiet for a moment and then said, Greaves is a good man. He has been here longer than he should have stayed given the conditions. He stayed because he cared, Elizabeth said. Yes, William said. I suppose he did. A pause. We should pay him properly, William said. Whatever we have been paying him, it should be more. Elizabeth looked at him. Yes, she said. It should. He said it like it was a practical matter, a management decision. But she heard what was under the small, careful movement of a man beginning to let himself care again about things in the world beyond the walls of his own grief. She did not say this out loud. She just agreed about the salary and moved on because she had learned in the months she had spent in his house that William Harrington was like a door that had been locked for so long. The hinges had gone stiff, and that the way to open a stiff door was not to force it, but to keep coming back steadily without urgency and trust that eventually the metal would warm. It was the 5th week when she heard him in the east wing. She was coming up the back staircase late in the afternoon when she heard it, a sound she had not heard from that part of the house before. She stopped on the stairs and listened. It took a moment before she placed it. Footsteps. Slow ones. The particular quality of footsteps that belonged to a person standing still more than moving. She did not go up. She stood on the stairs and listened, and after a while the footsteps stopped, and she heard the faint, specific sound of the door to the room with the painted horses and trees being opened. A long silence, then closed. Then his footsteps moving away back toward the main staircase, and she heard him pass at the top of the landing and go toward his study, and his footsteps were different. She had no better word for it. They were the footsteps of a man who has put something down or picked something up and is not entirely sure yet which. She went back down to the kitchen. She did not ask him about it. She had kept her word about not going into that room, and she understood with the instinct of someone who has spent years watching people in the privacy of their own households, that whatever William did in that part of the house was something he needed to do alone, and that her role was simply to make the rest of the house safe enough that he could afford to. The 6th week brought the party. It had been on the calendar since before Elizabeth arrived, a summer gathering at the Harrington Estate, the largest social event of the Virginia season. The kind of party where the entire county came to see and be seen, and where the absence of William Harrington would be noticed and commented on at great length. Mrs. Pratt had mentioned it to Elizabeth in the first week, with the careful neutrality of someone who had watched William avoid every social event for the past 4 years, and was uncertain whether the presence of a wife would change anything. William mentioned it to Elizabeth himself on a Thursday morning. "The Morrison party is Saturday," he said over breakfast. "Yes," she said. "I know." "I typically don't attend," he said. "I know that too," she said. A pause. "However," he said. She looked up. "I am told it would be appropriate given the circumstances for us to appear together," she said. "Yes." She looked at him. There was something in his expression that she was getting better at reading: a tightness around the jaw, a slight rigidity in his posture, the particular look of a man who has decided to do something difficult and is committed to completing it by the sheer force of his stubbornness. "All right," she said. "You are not going to argue." "Why would I argue? I think it is the right thing to do. I was only waiting to know whether you agreed." He looked at her as if she had done something unexpected, which she was beginning to realize was her most consistent effect on him. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. She wore green. It was the best dress she owned, not extravagant, but well made. The kind of dress that says capable rather than wealthy, which she had always thought was the more important thing to communicate. She dressed her own hair and declined the offer of her maid's more elaborate suggestions, and came downstairs at the appointed hour to find William waiting in the entrance hall. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. He looked at her. She was used to being looked at in the appraising way of a society that measured women by a very specific and very narrow set of standards. She was not used to being looked at the way William Harrington looked at her in that moment, briefly, thoroughly, with an expression that passed through several things too quickly for her to name before settling back into his customary composure. He offered his arm. "You look well," he said. It was not a compliment precisely. It was an observation stated with the same directness he applied to everything. But it was genuine, and she felt it as such. "Thank you," she said, and took his arm. They arrived at the Morrison party as the evening was shifting from early to full, the lanterns already lit on the wide lawn, the sound of music coming from inside. Elizabeth felt the shift in the crowd when they were seen, a ripple, a reorientation, the way a room adjusts when something unexpected appears. She felt it and kept her chin level and her hand steady on William's arm, and walked with him into the middle of it. For the first hour, they navigated together. He introduced her. She spoke to people. She was warm and composed, and said exactly the right things in exactly the right measure, and she watched the surprise on people's faces, the recalibration that happens when someone proves to be different from the rumor of them. William stayed close, closer than was strictly necessary. She noticed it. She thought he probably did not. And then Mrs. Worthington appeared. She came with two other women allies from the look of them, women wearing the particular expression of people who have come prepared to witness something. She came toward them with the smile that Elizabeth had last seen in the parlor at Harrington Estate, the smile that was a blade wearing a pleasant face. "William," she said, "how wonderful. We were not certain you would come." "Mrs. Worthington," William said, "and Mrs. Harrington." The smile turned to Elizabeth. "Lovely dress, my dear, very sensible." "I find sensible things hold up better over time," Elizabeth said pleasantly. Mrs. Worthington turned back to William. "We were just saying Louisa was asking, actually, she was wondering what it was about this particular match that recommended itself to you. Given your a gesture vague encompassing particular circumstances and your particular standards. You were always so very particular, William." The two women behind her were watching. The crowd around them had gone slightly quieter in that specific way of a crowd that is listening without appearing to. William looked at Mrs. Worthington. Elizabeth felt his arm shift under her hand. Just slightly, like something deciding. "No," he said. Mrs. Worthington blinked. "I beg your pardon." "No," William said again. His voice was perfectly even. "I am not going to explain my marriage to you. My wife is standing beside me. She has been managing my estate and this community with more competence and more genuine care than it has seen in years. She does not require your approval, and I do not require your curiosity about my decisions." A silence. A profound, complete, absolutely satisfying silence. Mrs. Worthington's smile went through several rapid and involuntary transformations. "Well," she said. "Good evening," William said, and turned and guided Elizabeth away. They walked until they reached the edge of the lawn, away from the crowd near the line of old trees that marked the Morrison property boundary. William stopped. His jaw was set. He was looking at the middle distance. Elizabeth looked at him. "You said you would not defend me," she said. "I was not defending you," he said. "I was telling the truth." She considered this. "That was the truth as you see it?" she asked. "That was the truth," he said without qualification. She was quiet for a moment, looking at his profile against the lamplight, the set of his jaw, the line of his shoulders, the particular expression of a man who has done something and is not going to apologize for it, and is also, she suspected, slightly alarmed by himself. "William," she said. He turned to look at her. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved in his expression, deep, barely visible, like movement beneath the surface of very still water. "You should not have to be thanked," he said, "for being treated correctly." "No," she said. "But I am thanking you anyway." And then, because she was not a woman who looked for signs that weren't there, and refused to pretend that things hadn't shifted when they had, she turned back toward the party and said, "Come. I promised the Morrison girls I would hear their performance, and I want cake." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "Cake," he said. "I am told it is very good," she said. "You have your priorities in order," he said, and offered his arm again. She took it, and William Harrington walked back into the party with his wife on his arm and his chin level and something in his posture that the people watching him that evening would later try to describe and mostly fail at, something that was less like the closing he had been for 11 years and more like a window that has been opened just enough to let air through. Just enough. But enough is a beginning. Back at Harrington Estate that night late, when the house was quiet, and Thomas had long since been put to bed, and the staff had retired, and the summer dark had settled in deep and full, Elizabeth was at the writing desk in her room composing a letter to her mother when she heard it. A sound from below. She set down her pen, listened. It was the piano. The piano in the front parlor that she had noticed on her first day, covered in a cloth untouched, the kind of covering that means not now rather than never. Someone was playing it. Slowly. A single melody, not quite a song, more like a man who once knew music and is trying to remember whether his hands still do. She did not go downstairs. She sat at her desk and listened. The melody was tentative at first, stopping and starting a note wrong, and then corrected. But then it found itself something quiet and low and aching, the kind of music that is not about skill, but about the feeling underneath skill, the thing that makes sound into meaning. She sat very still. The music went on for perhaps 20 minutes. Then it stopped. The house was quiet again. She picked up her pen. She did not write the sentence she had been composing for her mother. Instead, she sat for a long moment, looking at nothing, feeling the specific sensation of something coming undone at the edges, something that has been held very tightly beginning just barely to loosen. She was not here to fall in love with him. She had told herself that very clearly many times in many different ways with great conviction. She told herself again now. Then she blew out the lamp and went to bed, and she lay in the dark and listened to the Virginia summer and thought about a man sitting alone at a covered piano in a house that had been cold for 11 years, finding his way, one uncertain note at a time, back towards something that felt like warmth. She thought, I will not say anything about it. She thought, I will just let him. And in the dark alone, in the east bedroom that was hers, she pressed her hand flat against her chest where something was happening that she was not sure she was ready to name. But she felt it. She felt it clearly. And she did not pull away from it. Not yet. The morning after the piano, William came to breakfast and said nothing about it. Neither did Elizabeth. They ate in the particular silence of two people who are both aware that something has shifted and have mutually, without discussion, agreed not to name it yet. The coffee was hot. The bread was fresh. Thomas appeared in the doorway at one point, asking Bess something about the horses. And William looked up and watched the boy for a moment with an expression Elizabeth caught only from the side, something unguarded and quickly put away. She looked back at her plate. After breakfast. William pushed back his chair and said, "I am riding to the North Fields this morning. There is a boundary dispute with the Aldridge land I need to settle personally." "I'll come," Elizabeth said. He looked at her. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I want to understand the full extent of the estate boundaries. It will help me when I speak with the tenant families." A pause. I was doing the thing she had noticed weighing her not dismissively, but genuinely, the way a man weighs something he has not yet categorized. "Be ready at 8, he said. She was ready at 7:30. They rode north through the summer morning, with the heat already building, and the fields on either side turning gold in the early light. William rode with the ease of someone who had been on horseback since childhood. Not showy, just entirely comfortable. The way some men are comfortable in their own bodies when they are outdoors and moving, and the world has simplified itself to the immediate. Elizabeth rode beside him and kept pace, and after a while he said almost to himself, "You ride well." "I grew up in the country," she said. "Before my father's money ran out, we had horses." "How old were you when it ran out?" 14, she said. "Old enough to understand what it meant, young enough that my mother still tried to hide it." "What did it mean?" he asked. She glanced at him. He was looking ahead. "It meant that every plan anyone had made for me stopped being possible," she said. "And I had to decide what was possible instead." "And you decided to work in service." "I decided to be useful," she said. "Service was the form it took." He was quiet for a moment. "You could have married sooner," he said. It was not an insult, it was a question dressed as a statement. "Before 27. Someone less complicated," she said. "I was going to say less indifferent." She almost laughed. "I had 2 offers," she said. "When I was 22. One from a man who was kind but weak, who would have needed me to hold everything together for the rest of our lives. And one from a man who was strong but dishonest, who would have used me to manage his household and told himself it was love." "And you refused both." "I refused both," she said. "And then I worked for 5 more years and received your letter, and you were honest from the very first word, and I thought at least I know exactly what I am agreeing to." He looked at her, then straight on. "Was that enough?" he said. "Knowing?" The question was more naked than anything he had said to her before. She felt the weight of it, the genuine uncertainty in it, the thing underneath it that was not quite asking about the past, but about the present. "It was a good start," she said carefully. "Honesty is a good start." He held her gaze for one moment longer than comfortable. Then he turned back to the road. "The boundary marker is about a 1/4 mile ahead," he said. "Then let's go see it," she said. They rode on. The boundary dispute turned out to involve an elderly man named Crawford, who had farmed the line of land for 30 years, and had very firm opinions about where the Harrington property ended, and his began opinions which were not entirely supported by the official survey, and were entirely supported by his stubbornness. He came out of his farmhouse, when he heard the horses, looked at William, with the particular expression of a man who has been having this argument in his head for months, and then looked at Elizabeth with brief startled reassessment. "Mrs. Harrington," he said with considerably more civility than he had managed in previous encounters with the estate, according to what William had told her on the road. "Mr. Crawford," she said, dismounting, "I understand there has been some disagreement about the north fence line." Crawford launched into his account. It was long and detailed and occasionally circular, and William had clearly heard the relevant parts before, because his jaw was developing the set of a man exercising considerable patience. Elizabeth listened to all of it. She asked questions. She walked the fence line with Crawford himself following his gesturing hands, understanding not just the legal dispute, but the human one. This was a man who had worked this land for 30 years and felt underneath the property argument that something was being taken from him that had nothing to do with offense. "Mr. Crawford," she said when he had finished, "how many of your children work this farm with you?" He blinked, surprised by the turn. "2 sons," he said, "and a grandson now." 3 generations, she said. "That is something to be proud of." He straightened. "The Harrington Estate has no interest in pushing that fence line," she said, "if the current arrangement serves both parties fairly. What I would like to propose is a formal agreement, Written witnessed permanent, that establishes exactly where the boundary stands and protects your family's claim to what they have worked. Would that satisfy you? Crawford looked at her, then at William, then back at her. That would be fair, he said, behind her. Elizabeth heard William make a sound, very quiet. The sound of a man who has just watched a problem he has been managing badly for 6 months be resolved in 20 minutes. On the ride back, he said, "How did you know that was what he needed?" "He didn't want the land," she said. "He wanted to know it was secure for his grandchildren. Those are different things." "They are," William agreed. "Most disputes are," she said. "The thing people argue about is rarely the thing they are afraid of." He rode in silence for a moment. Then, "What are you afraid of?" She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, but she could see from his profile that it had cost him something to ask the slight tension, the careful neutrality he put on top of things that mattered. "Being invisible," she said. "I spent 7 years in houses where I was necessary but not seen. I am afraid of spending the rest of my life being useful, but not known." A silence. "And you?" she asked. A long pause. "Caring again, he said, "and losing it." She said nothing. She did not offer reassurance, because she understood that he was not asking for it. He was just for the first time saying the true thing out loud. They rode the rest of the way home without speaking, and it was the most honest silence she had ever sat inside. 2 days later, the trouble arrived from within. It came in the form of a letter. Elizabeth found it on William's desk. Not snooping, she had gone to his study to return an account ledger she had borrowed, and he was out, and the letter was sitting open on top of a stack of papers, face up in a way that suggested he had been reading it and been interrupted. She would not have looked at it, except that the signature at the bottom was visible from across the room, and the name was one she recognized, Robert Harrington. William's younger brother. She had heard him mentioned obliquely by Mrs. Pratt. In the way that people mention something they are not sure they should mention, with the particular care of someone stepping around a hole in the floor. Robert has not visited in some years. Robert and the master there was a disagreement. Robert lives in Boston now. She set the ledger down on the corner of the desk and left without reading the letter, but she carried the name with her all morning, and when William returned at midday and came to the dining room, looking like a man who has been doing something unpleasant and is managing it carefully. She did not ask. She waited. At dinner, he said, "I had a letter from my brother." "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "You saw it," he said. "I saw the signature. I didn't read it." He was quiet. He pushed his fork across his plate in a way that had nothing to do with eating. "I wants to come," William said. "He says he has business matters to discuss, estate matters." "What kind of estate matters?" "The kind," William said very carefully, "that Robert has been interested in since our father died. He believes a portion of the estate should have gone to him. It didn't. He has believed since then that I owe him something." "Do you?" William looked up. "No," he said. "The will was clear. The estate is mine. I have given Robert an allowance for 15 years, a generous one. He has never managed to keep it." "Then what does he want now?" William set down his fork. "He wants to see whether my new wife has made me softer," he said flatly. Elizabeth looked at him. "Has she?" she asked. For a fraction of a second something moved through William's face, caught almost between the answer that was safe and the answer that was true. "Tell him he may come," she said before he could answer. Better to face it directly than to let him wonder and maneuver from a distance. William looked at her for a long moment. "You are not worried?" "I have managed households through difficult family visits before," she said. "It is part of the work." "He will not be kind to you," William said. "Mr. Harrington," she said, and in her voice was something steady and absolutely certain. "Very few people have been kind to me in my life. I am still here." Robert Harrington arrived on a Thursday. He was 32 and looked like a version of William, assembled by someone who had used slightly cheaper materials. The same features but lighter, softer, with the look of a man who has spent his adult life being charming because he discovered young that charm was easier than character. He arrived with one manservant and 3 large trunks, and the easy confidence of a man who expects to be welcomed. He walked into the entrance hall, looked around and said, "William, the old place looks almost habitable." "Robert," William said. Then Robert turned and saw Elizabeth. He smiled. It was a very good smile. She recognized it immediately. She had seen it on men who had hired her as a companion, and then attempted to treat the situation as rather more than that. The smile of a man who has decided that charm is a tool, and who uses it without much consideration for the person it is being used on. "So this is the mysterious wife," Robert said. "Elizabeth, I have heard so little about you, which with William means either you are unimportant or you are very important indeed." "I am William's wife," she said pleasantly. "That is the relevant fact." Robert's smile widened by precisely the degree that told her he had registered her deflection and found it interesting. "I like her," he said to William. "You don't know her," William said. "No," Robert agreed. "But I intend to." The first 2 days of Robert's visit were surface smooth. He was entertaining at dinner, genuinely funny, with the practiced ease of a man who has spent years in Boston society and knows how to hold a table. He told stories. He made William almost smile twice. He was attentive to Elizabeth in the way that is technically correct, but carries underneath it the implication that attentiveness is a performance. Elizabeth watched him carefully. She watched the way he looked at the house, assessing pricing. She watched the way he spoke to staff, friendly. Easy, the friendliness of a man who believes servants are an audience. She watched the way he spoke to William, angling, always angling like a man walking around a wall, looking for a gate. On the 3rd day, he found her alone in the study. She was going over the quarterly accounts. He came in without knocking, sat in the chair across the desk, and looked at her with a different expression. The charm still there, but underneath it, something more direct. "I want to talk to you frankly," he said. "All right," she said, and set down her pen. "You are a sensible woman," he said. 7 years in service, you understand how things work, how money works, how families work." "I have some experience," she said. "Then you understand," he said, leaning forward slightly, "that William has resources that he does not fully use. Timber contracts, land, potential investments that have been sitting idle because my brother, since Margaret died, has had no appetite for building, for growth. I understand that William manages the estate according to his own judgment," she said. "His judgment has been grief for 11 years, Robert said. "That is not judgment, that is inertia." She looked at him. "What exactly are you asking me, Mr. Harrington?" He smiled. "I am not asking anything inappropriate. I am simply making you aware that there are opportunities, that if William were to consider certain arrangements, timber rights on the north acreage, specifically, the return would be substantial, and I have a buyer." "And your involvement in this arrangement?" she asked. "A finder's fee," he said smoothly. "Standard practice." Elizabeth picked up her pen. "I will mention it to William," she said. Robert's expression flickered. "I would prefer," he said, "if you might present it in the right moment. You have an influence with him that is—" "I will tell him his brother came to me privately with a business proposition," Elizabeth said, looking directly at Robert. "That is what happened. That is what I will tell him." A silence. Robert sat back. The charm dropped, not entirely, but enough. "You are not what I expected," he said. "No," she said. "I expect not." She told William that evening. She told him exactly what happened, exactly what was said, in exactly the order it occurred. She did not editorialize. She did not tell him what to think. She simply laid the facts in front of him, the way she laid the household accounts, clearly, completely, without omission. When she finished, William was very still. "He came to you," William said. "Yes. He came to you instead of me. He believed I could be—" She paused, choosing "managed" more easily than you. William stood up from his chair. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her. "He has done this before," he said. His voice was controlled, but just barely. "Different form, same calculation. He finds the softest point, and he pushes." "I am not the softest point," Elizabeth said quietly. William turned. He looked at her, and something in the look was different from everything before it. Sharper. More present. The look of a man who is seeing something he has been only half looking at, and is now looking fully. "No," he said. "You are not." He said it like a fact, like something he had just finished deciding. The next morning, he had a conversation with Robert that Elizabeth was not present for and did not try to hear. What she knew was that it lasted 40 minutes, that the voices were not raised, and that when it was over, Robert came to find her in the garden where she was walking with Thomas, showing the boy how to identify plants by leaf shape. A thing she had loved as a girl. Robert stood and looked at Thomas for a moment. "The stray William collected," he said. "The boy who lives here," Elizabeth said without heat. "His name is Thomas." Robert looked at her. "William says I will be leaving tomorrow," he said. "I see," she said. "This was your doing," he said. "I told your brother the truth," she said. "What he did with it was his decision." Robert was quiet for a moment. He looked at the house, the same appraising look she had seen on the first day, but something had gone out of it. "He hasn't stood up to me like that in years," Robert said, and it was not quite an accusation. It was something more complicated, something that might in a different man have been near to loss. "Perhaps," Elizabeth said, "he had nothing to stand up for before." Robert looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to the house. Thomas tugged her sleeve. "Is he bad?" the boy asked with the directness of children. "He is," Elizabeth said carefully. "A man who learned the wrong lessons from his life. That is not quite the same as bad." Thomas considered this. "Can he learn the right ones?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe. People sometimes surprise you." Robert left the next morning. William watched him go from the front steps, not cold, but not warm. The farewell of two people who share blood and not much else. When the carriage was gone, William stood on the steps for a moment, and Elizabeth stood beside him, and she thought he might say something about Robert. Something about the conversation, something about the years of it. Instead, he said, "Thomas asked Bess if he could start learning to read." She blinked. "Did he?" "She told him to ask you." Elizabeth looked out at the road where the dust from Robert's carriage was settling. "I'll start him tomorrow morning," she said. William nodded. "Good," he said, and they went inside. It was the morning of the second week after Robert's departure that Elizabeth found William in the stable. She had not been looking for him. She had come to check on a mare that had been favoring her left foreleg, a minor concern that James the footman had mentioned to her. She heard William's voice before she saw him speaking low, and even in the way people speak to animals, the voice you use when you want something frightened to understand that you are not a threat. She stepped into the stable doorway. He was in the far stall. The horse. There was the gray stallion. Ajax, the staff called him, with the particular combination of respect and wariness that the name suggested. She had seen Ajax from a distance, and heard his history in pieces, a horse bought from a bad situation, mistreated before he came to Harrington, prone to violence with strangers, the kind of horse that most people had already written off, and that William had bought anyway, for reasons no one entirely understood. Ajax was backed against the far wall. William was standing in the center of the stall. Not approaching, not retreating, just standing. Patient, solid. His hand at his side open. She did not move. She watched. The horse was tense. She could see it in every line of his body. The coiled, watchful tension of an animal waiting for the blow it has learned to expect. And William just stood there, not pushing, not flinching, just being present, waiting for the horse to realize he was safe. Slowly, very slowly. Ajax took one step forward. William did not move. Another step. The horse put his nose to William's open palm. Pulled back. Put it there again. William said very quietly, "That's it. There you are." Elizabeth did not make a sound. But something was happening in her chest. Something that had been building for weeks, that she had been very carefully not acknowledging, something that was shifting now from the category of feeling. I should not have, to the category of feeling that is already true, whether I acknowledge it or not. She loved him. Not the sudden reckless love of stories. Something slower. Something made of 100 small things, the wildflowers on the dining table that weren't Bess's, the handkerchief on the road, the salary for the schoolmaster, the laugh he almost had, and then pulled back the piano in the dark, the way he stood at Robert's departure, like a man who is slowly, painfully learning to be brave again. She loved him, and she was not supposed to. She had made a bargain. A clear one. No demands on his personal life. No expectations beyond what was agreed. She had known what she was walking into. She stepped back from the doorway before he could turn and see her, and she went back to the house, and she stood in the kitchen with Bess making unnecessary conversation about the week's provisions, and she was very careful and very composed, and she told herself the same thing she had told herself in the east bedroom on the first night. It is enough. She told herself that 3 times. She believed it less each time. 3 days later, she was with Ajax herself. Not deliberately, or not entirely deliberately. She had started visiting the stable in the mornings officially to check on the mare's leg, and Ajax was always there, always watching from his stall with those dark, wary eyes. She had begun stopping at his stall, not entering, just standing at the door speaking quietly, letting him learn the sound of her. On the 3rd morning she unlatched the stall door and stepped inside. She heard the sharp intake of breath from behind her. William was behind her. She had not heard him come in. He was standing in the center of the stable, and his expression was the first genuinely alarmed expression she had ever seen on his face. Not controlled alarm, real alarm. "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was low-taut. "Come out of there. Now." "He's all right," she said, not turning. "He is afraid, not dangerous." "He has put 2 men on the ground," William said. "Come out." "Stand still," she said, "and be quiet, and he will settle." "Elizabeth." "William." She said his name the way she had learned to say it, steadily, without anger, with the particular quality of voice that said, "I am not asking for permission, and I am not going to panic." "Stand still." A silence. She heard him stop moving. She kept her body turned sideways to Ajax, not facing him, not turning away, the way you show something frightened, that you are not a threat and not a prey animal either. She spoke quietly. Low, even words, not the content, but the sound of them, the signal of them. Ajax moved. Not at her. Toward her. The same tentative testing step she had watched him take toward William 3 days before. Then another. His breath warm on her arm. She stayed very still. He put his nose to her shoulder. She reached up slowly and laid her hand on the side of his neck. He did not move away. Behind her, she heard William exhale. She stood with her hand on Ajax's neck for another full minute, and the horse was still, and then she stepped back carefully and came out of the stall and latched it behind her and turned around. William was looking at her with an expression she did not have a name for. It was not the measuring look. It was not the careful composure. It was something past all of that, something open and shaken and intent. "How did you know he wouldn't?" "I didn't know," she said. "But I have been watching him for 2 weeks. He is not dangerous. He is afraid. There is a difference." William looked at her. "Yes," he said. "There is." And in the way he said it, she understood that they were not talking about the horse. She held his gaze. She should have looked away. She knew she should have looked away. She had been very careful and very controlled and very honest with herself about what she was and was not entitled to expect. And looking at William Harrington like this, with everything she felt visible on her face, because she was too tired this morning to hold all of it back, was not something she had planned. But she did not look away. And he did not look away. The stable was very quiet around them. The horses breathed. The summer light came in at the same angle it always came in. Nothing was different, and everything was different. "Elizabeth," he said. His voice was different. She had learned every register of his voice by now. The estate voice, the dinner voice, the public voice, the rare, almost laugh. This was none of them. This was something she had not heard before. Something lower and more careful, and more frightened than anything else. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know what I had decided. I had been very clear with myself." "I know," she said. You were supposed to be—" He stopped. "What?" she said quietly. "What was I supposed to be?" "Safe," he said. "You were supposed to be safe. I thought if I chose carefully enough, chose someone who understood, that you would not have to feel anything." "Yes." She looked at him. "I chose wrong," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a man standing in front of a fact he has been avoiding and has finally run out of ways around. She did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that was not either a lie or a leap, and she was not a woman who leaped. She was a woman who stood very still in a stall with a frightened horse and waited. He took one step toward her. She did not step back. "I heard you," he said. "3 nights ago. I was walking past and the door was open and I heard you." She went very still. "What did you hear?" she asked. He held her gaze. Something in his face was raw in a way she had never seen, not performed vulnerability, not the careful sharing of grief he had allowed himself once at dinner. This was the thing underneath all of it. "You said," he said slowly, "that you did not come here to be loved." The air went out of the room. She had said that. She remembered it 3 nights ago, unable to sleep, sitting in the window talking to herself the way she sometimes did when the house was quiet and her defenses were down. She had said it out loud to the dark, "I did not come here to be loved. I came here because being useful was the only thing I knew how to be." He had heard her. "Elizabeth," he said, "you don't need to. You have spent your whole life," he said, and his voice was not controlled anymore, "being useful, being capable, being what everyone needed you to be, and telling yourself that was enough." She could not speak. "It is not enough," he said. "I know I have lived that lie for 11 years, and I know exactly how it feels, and it is not enough, and you deserve—" He stopped. He looked at her like a man standing at the edge of something he is not sure he can survive, but is going to try anyway. "You deserve to be known," he said. "Not useful. Known." The word landed in her chest like something that had been waiting a very long time to arrive. She felt her eyes burn. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had learned not to in the years in the houses, in the long, careful management of a life that had to be built without the things she had wanted. She had learned to hold it steady and keep moving and not give the grief a place to land. She was not going to cry now. She pressed her hands flat against her dress and breathed. "William," she said. "I know," he said. "I know I have not given you reason to—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. She looked at him. "Stop explaining yourself, and stop apologizing, and stop managing it," she said, and her voice was very steady, even with everything under it. "Tell me what you mean, plainly. The way you told me the truth in the carriage. That way." A silence. He held her gaze. "I mean, William Harrington said that I am not ready, and I am afraid. And I have been afraid since the 2nd week when you said the house felt like nobody lived here, and I understood that you were right, and that I had chosen that on purpose." "Yes," she said. "And I mean," he continued, "that I have not been able to stop." He paused, fought for the word, "noticing you." For weeks. Every conversation, and every morning, and that day on the road, and the Worthington woman, and the way you were with Thomas, and the— He stopped, looked away, looked back. "I do not know how to do this," he said. "I have been closed for so long I do not know whether the door still opens." Elizabeth looked at him. She thought about Ajax standing against the far wall of his stall with all that fear in him, and how the answer had not been to force it, and how the answer had not been to give up, and how the answer had been to simply stand with him in the same space steadily without urgency, and let him find his own way to the open hand. "I am not going anywhere," she said. "You deserve more than—" "I will decide what I deserve," she said. "I am standing here. I am not going anywhere. That is my choice." He looked at her for a long moment. Something happened in his face, the last of the holding, the last of the distance, something giving way underneath the composure, not breaking, but releasing the way. Ice releases in spring, not all at once, but definitely, and with no intention of going back. "All right," he said, Just that. All right. She nodded. They stood in the stable in the summer morning, and the horses breathed around them, and nothing was resolved, and everything was changed. And Elizabeth pressed her hands flat against her dress and thought, "There you are. There you finally are." And William Harrington looked at the woman he had married expecting nothing and said nothing more. He did not need to. The door at last was open. The days after the stable were different. Not dramatically different. Not the kind of different that announces itself. More like the difference between a room before a window is opened and after. The same room. The same furniture. But the air has changed and everything in it breathes easier. William came to breakfast every morning. Not because the estate required it. Not because Mrs. Pratt had suggested it, or because social convention demanded it. He came because he came, and Elizabeth did not remark on it, and they ate together and spoke about the day ahead, and sometimes did not speak at all, and both of those things were good. He started riding with her 3 mornings a week. Not every morning she understood that he was a man who needed solitude, the way some people need water, and she did not push into that. But 3 mornings, sometimes 4. They rode out together across the Harrington land and spoke about the estate and the tenants and the school and the small accumulating facts of a life being built in a place. And occasionally they spoke about other things, and occasionally they did not speak, and it was all of it good. Thomas was learning to read. This had become without anyone quite planning it. A morning fixture, Elizabeth at the kitchen table with Thomas beside her, and a hornbook propped against the sugar jar. The boy's face set with the focused ferocity of someone who has decided that this skill belongs to him, and he intends to take it. He was quick. Quicker than she had expected, and she had expected quick. Within 2 weeks, he had the alphabet. Within 3, he was sounding out words with the careful deliberateness of a boy who understands that each one is a small victory. William stopped in the kitchen doorway one morning and watched. He watched for nearly a minute before Thomas noticed him. The boy looked up, straightened slightly in the way he always did around William, not fearful anymore, but respectful with the particular respect of a child who has decided that a man is worth it. "Good morning, sir," Thomas said. "What are you reading?" William asked. Thomas held up the page Elizabeth had written out. William crossed the kitchen, looked at it, looked at Thomas. "What does that say?" he asked, pointing to a word. Thomas sounded it out carefully. "Got it right." William looked at Elizabeth. She looked back at him, and what passed between them in that look was something she had no word for. Something warm and quiet and mutual. "Keep going," William told Thomas, and walked out. Elizabeth watched him go. "He likes me," Thomas said confidently, turning back to his page. "Yes," she said, "I believe he does." The morning everything changed was a Thursday. She woke early, before the house was fully awake, and dressed quickly, and went downstairs without particular purpose. The kind of waking that happens when something in you has decided there is something to attend to before your conscious mind has been consulted. The kitchen was empty. Bess didn't arrive for another half hour. Elizabeth put the kettle on herself and stood waiting for it, and heard from the direction of the east wing footsteps. She stood still. She knew those footsteps by now. She knew the sound of William moving through his own house, the particular weight and rhythm of them, the places where the floor creaked that he never seemed to notice because he had lived with them his whole life. He was in the east wing, at the room. She did not go up. She stood with her hand on the kettle and listened to the silence from above, the particular silence of a man standing inside something difficult, and she waited. He came downstairs 20 minutes later. He stopped when he saw her in the kitchen. He looked, she thought, like a man who has been somewhere hard and has come back from it still carrying what he found. "I didn't know you were down," he said. "I made tea," she said. "Sit." He sat. She set a cup in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it and looked at the table and was quiet for a long moment. "I go in there sometimes," he said finally. "To the room." "I know," she said. "It doesn't—" He paused. "It doesn't hurt the same way it used to. It used to feel like opening a wound every time. Now it feels more like visiting," she said quietly. He looked up. "Yes," he said. like visiting. She sat across from him with her own cup and did not say anything because he was not finished, and she had learned when he was not finished. His name was Thomas, William said. Our son. I almost never say it out loud. I don't know why. As if saying it makes it more real, she said. Real, he agreed. He was 3 years old and he liked horses. He was not afraid of anything. Margaret used to say he got that from me, but I think he got it from her. She was never afraid either. Elizabeth held her cup and listened. The fever came in October, William said. Margaret first, and then Thomas 2 days later. By the time I understood how serious, He stopped. His jaw worked. It was 4 days. 4 days from the first sign of it, and then they were both gone, and I was standing in a house that had been full of people and was suddenly empty, and I did not know what to do with my hands. What did you do? Elizabeth asked. I went to war, he said. 6 months later. There was a campaign in the South I volunteered. I thought, he stopped again. I think I hoped, if I am being honest, that I would not come back. Elizabeth set her cup down. But you did, she said. But I did, he said. And the house was still empty. And I understood then that there was that I could not outrun it. So I decided to stop running and simply stop. Stop caring. Stop hoping. Manage the estate, fulfill the obligations, and feel nothing. It seemed... He looked at her. It seemed very logical. It does seem logical, she said. Until you discover that you cannot actually choose to feel nothing. You can only choose to feel nothing about the things in front of you. Everything else you buried just stays there in the dark, getting heavier. He looked at her for a long moment. When did you become so wise, he said, and there was something in it, not quite humor, but the cousin of humor, the warmth of a man who is close enough to lightness to touch it. I became pragmatic, she said. That is different from wise. I had to understand things quickly because there was no one else to understand them. Your family, he said. My mother tried, Elizabeth said. She was a good woman, but she was not built for hardship. When my father died and the money was gone, she sort of folded. She did not mean to. She simply could not hold the shape of a life that had been broken. And you held it for her. I tried, she said. I was 14 and I held it badly, but I got better. You got better, he repeated, and she heard in it something that was not quite admiration, something more personal than admiration. The recognition of a man who has spent years believing that strength and softness cannot exist in the same person, watching evidence accumulate to the contrary. William, she said. Yes. I need to ask you something. He went still in the way he always went still when he sensed something important approaching. Ask, he said. The arrangement we made, she said carefully. When we married, the terms you laid out in the carriage. His expression shifted, something wary coming up. I remember them, he said. I want to know, she said, whether you still mean them, not as an accusation, not as a demand for anything different. I need to know what is true, because things have changed, and I do not want to be. I will not be the kind of woman who pretends things haven't changed when they have, and then is surprised when she is hurt. A silence. He looked at her steadily. Things have changed, he said. I know. Elizabeth, I am not asking you to say anything you don't mean, she said. I am asking you to say what you do mean. That is all I have ever asked. He stood up. She thought he was going to walk away, and she held herself very still against the brace of that, against the readiness for it, because she had been readying herself for it for weeks, and she knew how to survive it. He did not walk away. He walked around the table. He stood in front of her, and she looked up at him, and he looked down at her with the expression she had seen in the stable. The open, undone, frightened, decided expression of a man who has stopped lying to himself and is trying very hard not to start again. The terms I laid out in the carriage, he said slowly, were the terms of a man who was trying to prevent something that has happened anyway. Her heart was very loud. What has happened? She asked. You know what has happened, he said. I want you to say it, she said. The way you said the truth in the carriage, that way. He took a breath. I did not want to love you, he said. I chose you specifically because I believed I would not. I thought I had been careful enough. Strategic enough. A pause. I was wrong. She looked at him. I am not offering you poetry, he said. I do not have poetry. I am a man who almost died to avoid feeling this again, and who has spent 6 weeks discovering that the precautions I took were useless because you... He stopped. Because you did not behave the way you were supposed to behave. How was I supposed to behave? She asked. You were supposed to be competent and quiet, and easy to appreciate from a distance, he said. Instead, you walked into my house and learned every person's name, and fed the hungry boy, and fixed the school roof, and told Mrs. Worthington to her face that men of genuine substance value competence over convention. And said, the house felt like nobody lived here on the first night, the very first night, and you were right, and I have not been able to... He stopped. I have not been able to stop thinking about you, he said. For weeks. It is inconvenient and frightening, and I have managed to behave poorly about it for the entirety of that time, and I am aware of that. Elizabeth stood up. She was close to him now, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze, close enough to see the line of his jaw and the careful control he was using to hold himself steady. You have not behaved poorly, she said. I was cold to you on our wedding night. You were honest, she said. You have always been honest with me. That is not poor behavior. That is the only thing I have ever asked for. Elizabeth, he said. William, she said. And then he did something she had not prepared for. He reached out and took her hand. Not a social gesture. Not the correct formal gesture of a man performing his role. He took her hand, the way a person takes hold of something they are afraid of losing, carefully, deliberately, with his full attention. She felt the warmth of it go all the way through her. I do not know how to do this, he said, and his voice was quiet and very honest. I am going to make mistakes. I have been closed for so long I do not always know where the door is. But I want... He paused. I want to try. She looked at their hands. She turned her hand over and held his properly, the way you hold something you intend to keep. Then we will figure it out, she said. Together. He exhaled. A long breath. The breath of a man putting down something very heavy. Together, he said. They stood in the kitchen in the early morning, and the kettle had long since boiled, and the tea had gone lukewarm, and neither of them moved. The first true test came 4 days later, and it came from a direction Elizabeth had not anticipated. A letter arrived from her mother. She read it at the writing desk in her room, and by the second paragraph, she was holding very still, and by the end, she was simply sitting with the letter in her lap, looking at the wall. Her mother was ill, more ill than the last letter had suggested, more ill than she had let Elizabeth know. The woman who managed her mother's care, a widow in their home village, who had been paid through the estate account, had written separately to Mrs. Pratt, and Mrs. Pratt, with the quiet loyalty she had been showing for weeks, brought Elizabeth both letters together without comment. Elizabeth sat with them for an hour. Then she went to find William. He was in the study. He looked up when she came in, and whatever was on her face made him set down his pen immediately. What happened? He said. She told him about her mother. She told it plainly, without drama, the way she told most things. But he had learned her well enough by now to hear the thing underneath the plain, telling the way the facts were carrying more weight than facts usually do. I need to go to her, Elizabeth said. I know the timing is. When do you want to leave? He said. She stopped. I will arrange the carriage, he said. Today if you want, tomorrow at the latest. She looked at him. It will be at least 2 weeks, she said. Possibly more. I don't know how. Then take the time you need, he said. The estate will be managed. Mrs. Pratt can handle the household. I could ask Mrs. Pratt to... Elizabeth, he said, and his voice was very steady and very certain. Go to your mother. She stood in the doorway of his study and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. The specific, undeniable sensation of being taken care of. Not managed. Not arranged. Cared for. By a man who had been told she didn't need it and had decided she did anyway. I will be back, she said, because she needed to say it. I know, he said. Thomas. I will look after Thomas, he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. I will read with him in the mornings, William said, until you return. She felt her throat tighten. "He is very particular about the method," she said because she needed a moment. "I expect I will manage," William said, and something at the corner of his mouth just barely moved. She left the next morning. She was gone for 19 days. William wrote to her on the 4th day. The letter was short estate matters. Thomas's progress, a note that Ajax had taken an apple from his hand without hesitation, and that he had found this unreasonably satisfying. It was a practical letter. It was the letter of a man who does not know yet how to write what he wants to say, and is saying adjacent things instead. She wrote back the same day. She told him about her mother, the same illness, the same woman, but smaller. Somehow, the shrinking that happens when a person who has held a shape for so long finally stops. She told him that her mother had asked about William, and she had described him carefully, honestly, and that her mother had said, "He sounds like a man who is learning to be brave." She told him she thought that was right. She did not tell him that she had cried that night, not with grief, but with something harder to name, the specific ache of being away from a place that had become home without her fully deciding it, and away from a person she had not fully admitted she needed. His second letter arrived on the 10th day. It was longer. He wrote about the estate briefly. He wrote about Thomas, who had progressed to whole sentences and was insufferably proud of himself, which William reported with a tone that was professionally neutral and entirely failed to conceal that he found it genuinely delightful. He wrote about riding out to the Crawford farm, and the old man's satisfaction with the written boundary agreement now official and signed. And then at the end he wrote, "The house is quiet in the evenings. It has always been quiet, but it is a different kind of quiet now. I notice the difference. I wanted you to know that I notice." She read that paragraph 4 times. She wrote back that night, "I notice it too. Come home soon." I almost wrote, and then I remembered, it is your home, not mine, to ask for. But I will be back shortly. Keep the lamp on. He wrote back in 3 days. It is your home. It has been since the first night. Come back when you can. She came back on a Saturday in the late afternoon, 3 days earlier than she had planned. She had not told him she was coming early. The carriage came up the drive and she looked at the house, the red brick, the white columns, the oaks making their tunnel of shade, and felt something land in her chest. Belonging. The specific, irreplaceable sensation of arriving at a place that is yours. She stepped out. Mrs. Pratt was at the door, and then James, and then Bess, appearing from the direction of the kitchen, and then Thomas at a dead run, who collided with her at the front steps with the unself-conscious force of a 9-year-old who has decided that subtlety is for other people. "You're back," he said into her shoulder. "I'm back," she said, holding him. "He read with me every morning," Thomas reported, pulling back to look at her. "He's not as good as you, but he tries very hard." She laughed. A real laugh out loud, the kind she had almost forgotten she was capable of. "Where is he?" she asked. "The stable," Thomas said. "Ajax got out this morning. It took 3 men to get him back. Mr. Harrington was—" Thomas paused, searching for the right word with the precision of a boy who has recently discovered that words are important. He was very determined. She handed her travel bag to James and went to the stable. William was inside, unsaddling his horse, still in his riding coat, his back to the door. She heard him before she could say anything. He was speaking to his horse low, and even the same voice she had heard him use with Ajax with Thomas, occasionally with her when he was saying something true. "The estate is perfectly manageable for 3 weeks, he was saying to the horse. "I am not a man who requires—" He heard her footstep and turned. He went completely still. She stood in the doorway. For one long moment, he just looked at her, and on his face was every day of 19 days uncovered, unhidden, the face of a man who has stopped performing and is simply present in what he feels. "You're early," he said. "I am," she said. "Your mother. She is stable. She is resting. She is being well cared for." Elizabeth took a step into the stable. "I wanted to come home." He said nothing. But he crossed the stable in 4 strides and stopped in front of her close enough that she had to look up and looked at her the way he had looked at her in the kitchen after the East Wing morning, open and undone and decided. "I missed you," he said. 3 words, plain and direct in the voice that did not perform. I know, she said. I read it in every letter. I was not aware I was being that obvious. You were not obvious at all, she said. I was just paying attention. Something crossed his face that almost laughed closer than usual. Then he took both her hands in his the way he had in the kitchen and held them, and she felt the warmth of it spread up her arms and into her chest. I want to talk to you, he said. Tonight at dinner. There are things I want to say that I have not said yet. All right, she said. Properly, he said. Not in the stable. All right, she said again, and she was not quite smiling, but very close. He released her hands, stepped back. The composure settled back around him, but it was different now, thinner or softer, the composure of a man who is wearing it by habit rather than necessity. Go inside, he said. Bess has been holding dinner. For how long? Since 4 o'clock, he said. When she heard the carriage. She stopped. The carriage came at 4:30, she said. How did Bess know at 4? I may, William said with great dignity, have asked James to watch the south road from the upper window. She looked at him. He looked back. Entirely composed. Entirely aware that his composure was not doing what he intended. Since what time? She asked. A pause. 2 o'clock, he said. She walked out of the stable before he could see her face fully, but she heard him behind her, a breath quiet, brief. The sound of a man who has caught himself being human and has decided this time not to take it back. Dinner was the two of them at the long table, and Bess had outdone herself, and Thomas appeared at the doorway at one point to report that Ajax had eaten again without issue, which he delivered with the solemn authority of a field correspondent, and William told him to go to bed, and Thomas went, though not without significant eye contact with Elizabeth that communicated he expected a full report. When the table was cleared and the staff had withdrawn, and it was just the two of them in the warm, quiet room, William looked at her. I have been thinking, he said, about what I want. She folded her hands on the table. I have not thought about what I want, he continued, in a long time. It seemed like a dangerous thing to do, wanting things. Yes, she said, but I want to say it out loud, he said. Because you asked me for honesty, and I have been giving you pieces of it. I want to give you all of it. She waited. I want you, he said simply. Not the arrangement, not the mistress of the estate. You, Elizabeth. He paused. I want to be your husband. The full meaning of that word which I told you on our wedding night I could not offer. I want to take that back. The room was very quiet. You cannot take back a year. I know, he said. I know I cannot. I know there is no. I am not asking you to pretend the past months were something different. I am asking whether what they were is enough of a beginning that we might... He stopped. I am asking whether you will choose this. Choose me, knowing exactly what I am. All of it. She looked at him for a long moment. This was William Harrington, 36 years old, closed for 11 years, frightened, stubborn, occasionally impossible, brilliant at managing everything except his own heart. The man who put wildflowers on the dining table and attributed them to Bess. The man who sat at a covered piano in the dark and found his way back to music one note at a time. The man who read with Thomas every morning for 19 days in her absence. The man who posted away at the South Road window at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because he could not quite bring himself to simply stand at the window himself. She loved him completely. She had known it for a while. She said, I chose you in the carriage, William, when you told me the truth, and I decided that honesty was enough to build on. I have been choosing you every day since. I did not stop. He held her gaze. You should have higher standards, he said roughly. I have excellent standards, she said. I chose a man who is honest, decent, capable of change, genuinely good underneath all the armor and improving every week. Those are very high standards. Improving, he said. Considerably, she said. He reached across the table. She took his hand. Elizabeth, he said. Yes, she said. I am going to love you well, he said. It may take me some time to know how to do it properly, but I intend to. I want you to know that I intend to. She felt her eyes burn again, the same way they had burned in the kitchen weeks ago, and this time she let them. "I know you do," she said. "And I am sorry," he said. "For the wedding night, for the carriage, for the months of—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. "Those months," she said, "were not wasted. We needed them. You needed to see me, and I needed to see you, and you cannot see a person properly if they are performing for you. We did not perform for each other. I would not trade them." Hal was quiet. "You are remarkable," he said. Not a compliment, a statement the way he stated all facts with his full attention behind it. "I am practical," she said. "You are remarkable," he said again. "Let me say it." She let him say it. Outside, the Virginia summer was dark and warm and full of crickets, and the oak stood quiet along the drive, and Harrington Estate held its people inside it. Bess in the kitchen. Mrs. Pratt in her rooms. Thomas asleep on his cot, dreaming whatever fierce dreams 9-year-old boys dream, and the lamp in the dining room burned warm and steady, and William Harrington sat at his table with his wife's hand in his, and felt something he had last felt 11 years ago. Something he had buried under grief and distance, and the long, exhausting performance of not caring. He felt at home. Not in the house. He had always been in the house. In his own life. He felt for the first time in 11 years at home in his own life. He held Elizabeth's hand and did not say that because he did not yet have the words for it. But she looked at him across the table and saw it on his face, that specific quality, that particular rest, and she knew. She knew without him saying it. And that she thought was what being known actually felt like. Not being told. Being seen. The change did not happen all at once. That was the thing. Elizabeth understood most clearly in the weeks after she came home that the change was not a single door opening, but 100 small ones, and that some of them opened easily and some of them stuck, and that the work of it was daily and ordinary and occasionally frustrating and entirely worth it. William was different. Not unrecognizable, she would not have wanted that. He was still William, still precise, still sometimes difficult. Still capable of going quiet for an entire morning when something in him needed working through. But the quality of the quiet had changed. Before, his silences had been walls. Now they were rooms. She was allowed inside rooms where he was genuinely present rather than absent behind the shape of himself. He reached for her hand at dinner. Not every night, but often enough that it had become a thing that happened, a thing they both expected without discussing his hand, crossing the table to find hers in the particular unhurried way of a man who has stopped having to convince himself to do it. He told her things, small things mostly. The kind of things a person tells the person they live with about the estate, about a letter from a business associate about something. Thomas said that he found unexpectedly funny. But also large things, occasionally late at night in the parlor, when the house was quiet and the defenses were down. Things about his father. Things about the war. Things about Margaret spoken not with the careful grief of a man protecting a wound, but with the gentler sadness of a man who has learned to carry a loss without being crushed by it. Elizabeth listened to all of it. She told him things too. She told him about the year she was 15, and had to tell a creditor that her father was not home, knowing full well he was home, and simply unable to face the door. She told him about the house she had worked in at 19, where the mistress had been kind in public and cruel in private, and she had stayed 2 years longer than she should have because she did not have anywhere else to go. She told him about the 2 offers of marriage at 22 and why she had refused them, and what it had cost her to refuse them, the specific loneliness of choosing correctly and still feeling the loss. He listened to all of it too. That was the thing she had not anticipated. Not just that he would open, but that he would receive. That the man who had been so closed would turn out to be underneath the armor. Someone genuinely attentive. Someone who remembered the things she told him and returned to them later, who heard the things she was saying underneath the things she said. 3 weeks after she came home, he found her in the garden with her hands in the dirt. She had taken over the kitchen garden, reorganizing it, replanting, establishing the kind of order that produces abundance rather than just adequacy. She was on her knees in the July heat, entirely focused, and she did not hear him come out until he crouched down beside her. She looked up startled. He looked at her hands. Dirt to the wrists. "You are destroying your gloves," he said. "I took them off," she said. "Your hands then." "My hands have been in worse," she said. "Hand me that trowel." He looked at the trowel, looked at her, picked it up and handed it to her with the expression of a man who has accepted that his wife is going to do the thing she is doing and has decided to participate rather than object. He stayed. Not doing anything particular just there, sitting on the low garden wall, watching her work, occasionally handing her something when she asked. They talked a little. Not about anything important. About the kitchen garden, about what she was planting, about whether Bess would approve of the new herb arrangement. And it was so ordinary. So entirely beautifully ordinary. She thought, this is what it is. This is what it actually is. The thing underneath all the stories about love, it is someone sitting on a garden wall handing you a trowel. She did not say that out loud. But when she glanced at him, she found him watching her with a quiet expression, and she thought from his face that he was thinking something close to the same thing. The morning. The real trouble arrived. It came through the front door, in the form of 3 visitors, and Elizabeth knew it was trouble the moment Mrs. Pratt opened the parlor door, and her face arranged itself into the very specific, careful neutrality that meant, "This is difficult, and I want you to know I am on your side." The visitors were a woman and 2 men. The woman was perhaps 60, dressed expensively, with the rigid posture of someone who has used their spine as a weapon for many years. The men were in their 40s, lawyers, from the look of their coats and their practiced expressions of polite regret. "Mrs. Harrington," the woman said. "I am Adelaide Harrington, William's aunt." Elizabeth stood. She had heard the name exactly once from Mrs. Pratt in passing, with the same careful tone that surrounded Robert's name. Adelaide Harrington, the master's father's sister. She lives in Richmond. She does not visit. "Mrs. Adelaide," Elizabeth said, "this is unexpected. William is not in the house at present." "I did not come to see William," Adelaide said, sitting without being invited to in the good chair. "I came to see you." The 2 lawyers settled on either side of her like parentheses. Elizabeth sat across from her and folded her hands and waited. "I will be direct," Adelaide said. "Please," Elizabeth said. "I have been watching this arrangement with some concern since the beginning," Adelaide said. "William's decision to marry a woman of your circumstances was in my view impulsive and uncharacteristic. I have spent the past several months waiting to see whether my concerns were justified." "And have they been?" Elizabeth asked. "That depends," Adelaide said, "on what you want." A pause. "I want to be William's wife," Elizabeth said. "I am William's wife." "You are a woman who came to this house with nothing," Adelaide said, "and who has in a very short time acquired a great deal. A name, a household, access to a considerable fortune." She looked at Elizabeth steadily. "I want to know what you intend to do with that access." Elizabeth looked at her. "I intend," she said, "to manage this household, well represent this estate in the community, raise the boy who lives here, and be a good wife to your nephew. That is what I intend." "And if William were to become ill," Adelaide said, "or incapacitated, or worse, you would find yourself in a position of considerable—" "Stop," Elizabeth said. Adelaide stopped. "I understand what you are asking," Elizabeth said. "You are asking whether I am here for the money, whether I married William for the estate, whether I am a capable woman who identified a vulnerable man and arranged herself accordingly." Adelaide said nothing, which was an answer. "I cannot prove a negative to you," Elizabeth said. "I cannot show you the inside of my motives. What I can tell you is that I had 2 offers of marriage before William, men with money. Men who would have been easier situations, and I refused them. I can tell you that I came here under terms that explicitly excluded everything a woman might marry for beyond security. And I can tell you that the way I feel about your nephew is not something I arranged." "Feelings are convenient things," Adelaide said. "Yes," Elizabeth said. "They are also, in my experience, the one thing people consistently fail to fake convincingly over time. I have been in this house for months. Watch me for more months if you need to." A silence. Then Adelaide said, and her voice had shifted, not softer, but more honest. "He was very broken after Margaret." "I know," Elizabeth said. You did not know Margaret. No. But I know what her loss did to him. And I know what he has been doing for the past several months with that loss. She paused. He has been putting it down. Carefully. With both hands. Nobody can make a person do that. He decided to. Adelaide looked at her for a long moment. The lawyers on either side of her were very still. He laughed, Adelaide said suddenly. At the Morrison party. 3 people wrote to tell me. They said William Harrington laughed at something his wife said. He does that occasionally now, Elizabeth said. He tries very hard not to, but he doesn't always succeed. Something happened on Adelaide's face, very small. The movement of a woman who has been holding a hard expression for a long time, feeling it shift. He has not laughed, Adelaide said, since Thomas died. His son, Elizabeth said quietly. His son, Adelaide confirmed. And in her voice for the first time was something human, the grief of a woman who loved a difficult man and had watched him disappear into himself and had not known how to reach him. William was not always this way. Before. He was difficult always, stubborn, private. But he was also alive, Elizabeth said. Adelaide looked at her sharply. Yes, she said after a moment. Alive. The lawyers were looking at their hands. I would like, Adelaide said carefully, to be introduced to him properly. Not as an interruption, not as a threat. I would like, if it is possible, to come to dinner. Elizabeth looked at her. I will tell him you called, she said. And I will tell him you would like to come to dinner. What he decides will be his decision. Of course, Adelaide said. She stood. The lawyers stood with her. She moved toward the door and stopped. You are not what I expected, she said. So I have been told, Elizabeth said. Something that was almost a smile crossed Adelaide's face. Then she was gone. William's reaction when Elizabeth told him was silence. The long kind. She let it run its course and waited. She came to warn you off, he said. She came to assess me, Elizabeth said. I think she found the assessment satisfactory. She had lawyers with her. Yes. I think they were mostly decorative. He looked at her. She wants to come to dinner, he said. That is what she said. And you think I should let her? Elizabeth chose her words carefully. I think, she said, that she is an old woman who loves you and has not known how to say it in years, and that estrangement is a very long word for something that started as stubbornness on both sides. She sided with Robert, William said. When my father died, about the estate. Yes, Elizabeth said. And she was wrong. And she has probably known she was wrong for some time, and not known how to unsay it. She paused. You are very good at carrying things, William. You are less good at putting them down. He looked at her. You are going to say I should practice, he said. I am going to say that a house with more people in it who love each other is a better house than a house with fewer, she said. But I will leave the decision to you. Howe was quiet for a long moment. Then, Tuesday, he said. Tell her Tuesday. The dinner with Adelaide was not easy, but it was real. That was the word Elizabeth kept returning to afterward. It was real in the way that only things that cost something are real. William and Adelaide said careful things, and then less careful things, and then at one point when Adelaide mentioned something about William's father, William went very still, and then said something sharp, and Adelaide went still in return, and they looked at each other across the table, with the accumulated weight of years and unfinished things between them. Elizabeth refilled her wine glass and waited. It was William who broke first. I know you were not trying to cheat me, he said. With Robert, at the time. I know you believed it was what our father wanted. Adelaide set down her fork. I was wrong, she said. Your father was very clear. I let Robert convince me otherwise, and I was wrong, and I have thought about it more times than you know. A silence. All right, William said. All right, Adelaide said. All right, he repeated. I am not going to give you a speech about it. It was a long time ago. You are here now. Adelaide looked at Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked back entirely neutral. She is good for you, Adelaide said, not to Elizabeth, but to William. I know, William said. Adelaide picked her fork back up. "The roast is excellent," she said. "Bess made it," Elizabeth said. "Give her my compliments," Adelaide said. "And tell her to come to Richmond if she ever wants a better position." "She won't," Elizabeth said pleasantly. "But I will tell her you said so." Adelaide's almost smile appeared again. After dinner, when Adelaide's carriage had gone, and Thomas was in bed, and the house had settled to its nighttime quiet, William found Elizabeth in the parlor and sat down beside her on the settee, not across the room, not in his usual chair, but beside her, close the way he had been sitting beside her more and more. "That was not terrible," he said. "No," she agreed. "She liked you." "She respected me," Elizabeth said. "That is better." "Is it?" "Liking is easy," she said. "Respect means she thinks I am capable of the work." He was quiet for a moment. Then he put his arm around her, the way he had been learning to do, not with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to it, but with the deliberate warmth of a man who has decided to stop making distance and is keeping the decision. She leaned into him. They sat in the parlor, and the lamp burned low, and the summer dark pressed at the windows, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was the kind of silence that is not empty. "I want to show you something," William said eventually. She looked up at him. He stood, offered his hand. She took it and stood. He led her upstairs. She knew where they were going before they arrived. She recognized the hallway, the particular quality of the silence. Here the door at the end with the plain latch. She had not been back here since the first week since the day she had opened it by accident and found him watching her from the far end of the hall. He opened the door. They went in together. She looked at the room. The low window sill, the painted frieze of horses and trees, faded along the walls. The particular quality of the light and the air. William stood beside her. "I want to give it a new purpose," he said. "It has been empty long enough." She understood what he was saying, not just about the room. "What purpose?" she asked quietly. "I thought—" He paused. "There will be a child. Eventually. If when." He looked at her. "I want there to be a child." She felt something move through her, something large and warm and certain. "Yes," she said. "This could be." "Yes," she said again. "This is exactly right." He looked around the room. "I thought we could paint over the frieze," he said. "Don't," she said immediately. He looked at her. "Keep the horses," she said. "Paint around them. Add to them. Let the room be both, old and new at once." He looked at the horses on the wall, at the trees, at the faded colors of something painted with love by someone who had wanted this room to be a good place. "Both," he said. "Both," she confirmed. He stood very still, and she watched him do the thing she had watched him do in pieces for months. Let the grief and the hope exist in the same room inside himself without choosing one and closing off the other. Both. The dead remembered. The living not buried with them. He reached out and touched the painted wall. Just for a moment. The way you touch something you love. Then he lowered his hand and turned to her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "William, let me say it," he said. "The carriage, the wedding night. I told you that you would spend it alone, and I watched you absorb it, and I told myself I was being honest, and I was being honest, but I was protecting myself at your expense. You were a person I had agreed to marry, and I treated you as an arrangement. That was wrong." "You did not know me," she said. "I know that," he said. "But you did not know me either, and you treated me with more care than I deserved from the very first day." She looked at him. "You have been giving me more than you owed since the first morning," he said. "The staff, Thomas, the school, the way you listened, the way you never made me feel small for being closed. You just stood there and were present and let me find my own way to you." "I wasn't doing it for you," she said. He looked at her. "I was doing it for me," she said, "because I decided in the carriage that I was going to be fully myself in this house. That I was not going to perform or diminish or disappear into the shape of what was convenient. I did it for myself." "I know," he said. "That is what made it work." She felt her throat tighten. "You cannot flatter someone into opening," she said. "You cannot perform your way into a person's trust. You can only be real and wait." "You were real," he said. "So were you," she said. "Eventually." The almost laugh, closer than usual. "Eventually," he agreed. He took both her hands. He held them the way he had in the kitchen, the way he had in the stable, the way he had been learning to hold things, not too tight, not too loose, with his full attention and his full intention. "Elizabeth," he said. "Yes," she said. "I love you," he said. "I want to say it directly, without the adjacent things, without the pause, without anything standing in for it. I love you. That is what is true." She felt it land. Not with surprise, she had known it, had felt it in every letter and every morning and every hand across the table. But there is a difference between knowing a thing and hearing it said in plain words, with someone's full face in front of you, and the difference mattered. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while." "How long?" he asked. "The piano," she said. He looked at her. "The night you played," she said. "I was in my room and I heard you, and I understood that you were finding your way back to something, and I—" She stopped. "That was when I knew." "I did not think anyone heard," he said. "I heard," she said. "I will always hear you." He bent and kissed her. Not the formal press of lips to knuckles on their wedding day. Something entirely different. Something present and warm and real. The kiss of two people who have found each other, not in a story, but in the daily, ordinary, extraordinary work of actually knowing each other. She held on. He held on. Outside the window of the small room with the painted horses, the Virginia summer was full, dark and warm and singing with crickets, and the oaks along the drive stood quiet and large, and Harrington Estate held everything inside its walls. The boy asleep down the hall, the housekeeper in her room, the cook in the kitchen preparing tomorrow's bread, the gray stallion in his stall, no longer afraid, the school with its mended roof where children were learning that someone cared what happened to them. All of it held. And in the weeks and months that followed, the house changed the way things change when they are finally allowed to, slowly, completely, and without going back. Adelaide came to dinner again. And again. She and William were never easy exactly, but they were honest, and honest turned out to be better than easy. She brought news from Richmond. She argued with William about estate policy at the table with the focused enjoyment of a woman who has been waiting years for someone to argue back. She called Elizabeth "my dear," in the particular tone that means, "I have decided you are family." Thomas turned 10, and then 11. He read everything he could find. He had an opinion about every book, and was not shy about sharing it. He followed William around the estate with the devoted attention of someone absorbing a craft, and William explained things to him. The land, the contracts, the management of complicated people with a patience and a thoroughness that Elizabeth watched from a distance and felt something warm and deep inside. One morning she overheard William telling Thomas about the North Boundary dispute, the Crawford resolution, the written agreement. "Why didn't you just force it?" Thomas asked. "You had the legal right, didn't you?" "Yes," William said. "So why didn't you?" A pause. "Because having the legal right to do something," William said, "does not always mean doing it is right. There is a difference. It is an important difference." "Mrs. Harrington says that too," Thomas said. "I know she does," William said. "She is usually correct." Elizabeth in the hallway pressed her hand to her mouth and did not make a sound. The autumn brought a letter from Robert. It was not long. It was not entirely gracious. But it was, Elizabeth thought, reading it, genuine. An acknowledgement carefully worded of what had occurred during his visit. An expression of something that was not quite an apology and was closer to it than anything she had expected. A mention of a new venture in Boston that he seemed for once to be approaching honestly. She brought it to William. He read it, set it down. "He is trying," Elizabeth said. "He is Robert," William said. "Yes," she said. "He is Robert trying. That is different from Robert not trying." He looked at her. "You think I should respond?" "I think you should decide what kind of man you want to be about your brother," she said. "And I think the man you have been becoming would respond." He was quiet. "You are not going to make it easy, are you?" he said. Not a question. "I am going to make it honest," she said. "You can decide whether that is easy." He wrote back to Robert the next day. Short. Not warm, not yet, but open. It was enough. The first snow came early that year in November, before the last of the autumn had finished, and Elizabeth stood at the parlor window and watched it fall and felt William come to stand behind her. Felt his hands settle on her shoulders with the easy certainty of a man who has stopped having to convince himself to touch the person he loves. "The Crawford fields will need checking," she said. "James can go," he said. "The school roof held through summer. It should hold through winter, but—" "It will hold," he said. "I had it properly reinforced in September." She turned to look at him. "When did you do that?" "When I realized you were going to worry about it all winter if I didn't," he said. She looked at him. This man, this difficult, precise, increasingly tender man, who had posted a boy at a window to watch for her carriage, and reinforced a school roof without mentioning it, and sat on a garden wall handing her a trowel, and played piano in the dark when he thought no one could hear. "I am with child," she said. The words came out quietly, simply the way she said true things. William went completely still. She watched it move through him. The stillness, and then the thing that broke through the stillness, and then the effort to manage that thing, and then the decision clear and visible to stop managing it. He turned her around to face him. He looked at her face with an expression she had no word for, and would not try to find one something too large for language, something that was fear and joy and grief and hope, all at once, all present, none of them hidden. "Are you certain?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I am certain." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were on her arms, and she felt them tighten slightly, not painfully, the grip of a man holding on. "I am afraid," he said. "I know," she said. "I was afraid last time, and I know," she said again. "And it is all right to be afraid. It means you love something. It means you are alive." He looked at her. "You are not afraid?" he asked. "I am terrified," she said. "But I am not going to let the fear be louder than everything else." He pulled her close. She let him. She held him back, her hands flat against his back, feeling the steadiness of him and the fear in him and the love in him all at once. "We will do this together," she said. "The way we have done everything." He said into her hair, "Together." She closed her eyes. The snow fell outside the parlor window, quiet and soft and indifferent to everything below it, and Harrington Estate stood in it, the way it had stood in every season for 50 years, solid, present, rooted. But it was not the same house it had been a year ago. The lamps burned warmer. The kitchen was loud with the sound of Bess and Thomas arguing about the correct way to peel a potato, a debate that had been ongoing for 3 weeks and showed no sign of resolution. Mrs. Pratt had taken to humming when she walked the halls, which she had apparently not done in 11 years, and had resumed as if she had never stopped. Ajax moved freely in his stall, calm and unafraid. The school on the edge of town was full of children whose parents believed that someone knew their names and cared what happened to them. Adelaide was coming for Christmas. Robert had sent a package, small, unexpected, a book for Thomas with a brief note that said, "I hear you are a reader. This was mine at your age." And in the parlor of Harrington Estate on a November morning with snow falling outside, William Harrington held his wife with both hands and felt the fear and the love and the future all at once, and he did not close any of them out. He held all of it. He had learned finally, with the slow and difficult courage of a man who almost did not try, that the answer was never to hold less. The answer had always been to hold more. That was what Elizabeth had known from the beginning. Not because she was wiser than him, not because she had suffered more, or loved more, or been braver, but because she had spent years in houses where she was necessary and unseen, and she had learned in all those years of being useful, without being known exactly what a life without love actually costs. She had come to Harrington Estate to be useful. She had stayed because she was known, and the man who had told her on their wedding night that she would spend it alone, the man who had chosen her specifically because he believed she would not break him, had broken open anyway, slowly and completely, because the right person at the right time, standing still and being real, is more powerful than any wall a frightened heart can build. He loved her. She loved him. The house was full. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.